Today we're going to look at the Christian and Worldliness. And I remember when I was in youth group, I got saved, grew up a Catholic, but then got saved in a Baptist church. And I was a ninth grader in high school. And man, I sold everything out for Jesus. I mean, I was sold out for Jesus. In fact, my sisters, I was the youngest. I had 3 older sisters. They couldn't stand being around me because they wanted to be just good Catholics and do their thing and not be bothered by this Jesus thing, you know, and I became this Jesus freak around the home. And I remember that I was in a tennis class and got into playing tennis and was having just a good time, and I went to buy a tennis, and I worked and I made my own money, and I went to buy this tennis racket. Well, it was $30. Now, back in 1972, 3, that was a lot of money for a stinking tennis racket. And I felt so guilty that I went to the youth pastor. I said, you know, if I buy this, is it worldliness because it's brand new and it's kind of like the top one going? Now it's like, you know, $230, you know. But back then it was $30. And he had to kind of sit me down and teach me a little bit about just because you buy something new, it's not worldliness, you know, and that we should get good quality on things and it's not wasting your money. He went through a whole time spending time with me, but I was just so concerned that I didn't want to be worldly. And sometimes we just don't, you know, we think, okay, we become a Christian and now, you know, I've got to look a certain way. I've got to be a certain way. I've got to be desperate in life to be spiritual. And I know that for a lot of times for being in the ministry and a pastor, you know, it's almost like you took a vow of poverty to be a pastor. And if you weren't in poverty, then you weren't being a good pastor. And that was a real hindrance, I think, for a lot of pastors and a lot of churches that would keep their pastor poor, unpaid, and it was because they thought it was spiritual. And I think we just get our ideas of what really is worldliness and what isn't. How would you describe a worldly person if someone has asked you, well, what is a worldly person? Some of you may be sitting there saying, I don't even have a clue to what you're even talking about. You know, what is a worldly person? Some may say it's a matter of what you do. You're worldly if you drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, dance, or even if you wear makeup. Or maybe you go to movies and you watch TV. All those kind of things was considered you're a worldly person if you do those things. I had a pastor at the Baptist church that was an associate pastor, and he said, and it was when videos first came out, and he goes, would you go down and rent me a video because I don't want people to see me going to He would never stop in a movie theater, let alone get a movie. But it's okay if I went as a youth and got it for him and he showed it in his house. But he didn't want anybody. And I heard of people that when the pastor came by of this one certain church, that they would hide the television in the stereo and not have it in the house because they didn't want to be worldly. You know, what... And that's just recent stuff, guys. I mean, you know, so we're all kind of mixing up. What is this? What is worldly and what isn't? Some believe that if you possess certain things, for me it was that tennis racket. Others could be valuable art or a luxury car or an expensive house. Then you're worldly if you have these nice things. Still others say it's a matter of what you are. If you're an athlete or a movie star or a politician, then you're worldly. And there was a lot of teaching that unless you became a leader in the church, if you were, you know, a doctor or a teacher or something like that, that was considered worldly, and you're less than if you were the pastor was the ultimate goal. And really the ultimate goal is that God sends us into places that we bring the priesthood of believers, and you represent Jesus in that place where God has chosen you to be. But we have all this mindset about what is a worldly person. Some insist that a worldly person is anyone who enjoys things of this world. And to avoid that, you have like the monks who are unworldly because they retreat to a monastery and they deny themselves normal pleasures. The Amish, to avoid being worldly. They wear plain clothes, and they live a certain style that they believe that they're in the world but not of the world, and so they separate themselves from anything that would be considered of the world. And they've laid this thing out, and it depends what set you're into, what they believe and what they decide on, because they don't want to be influenced by the world. 1 John that we read this morning defines worldliness in a way that really would surprise anyone who holds any of these viewpoints. It gives us both God's description of worldliness and his warnings against it, and we're going to kind of dive into that this morning. So what is worldliness? Well, the text begins with a command in verse 15, and it says, "Do not love the world." And some have wondered how God can say this when he himself loves the world. And we get a mixed message because John 3:16 says what? God so loved the world. So what in the heck, if God so loved the world and now we're not supposed to like the world, what is this, God? I'm mixed up here. But what this verse means when it talks about the world, it means the people in the world. It refers to a world system of evil under Satan's rule that is opposed to God. It's a world system that really Satan is ruling, and it's almost as if you can imagine this, that yes, God has created the world, but it's like it's being rented out by Satan right now, and he's the landlord, and he's demanding certain things. And so it's like, okay, we know that God owns it for this time period. For this time period, Satan's got a lot of control, and he wants to draw us in to a lot of things that and trick us up. We know that Satan's goal is to kill, destroy. He doesn't want any Christian to be anything in this life. He wants to destroy and kill us. We speak of the world of finance and the world of sports and the world of fashion, and each one of those have their own sets of values, their own sets of goals and priorities. So with the world here in 1 John here, we take worldliness and we define it as the pursuit of activities of life with no thought of God. It's the pursuit of activities of our life with no thought of God. That's worldliness. If you go about your daily affairs and never considered the Lord, your only frame of reference is this world, well, you may believe in God, but you ignore him. You may come to church, but the rest of the week, you don't even think of God. I would consider that you're probably pretty worldly. You can be a president of a Fortune 500 company and can be spiritual if you dedicate your work and your life to God. And you could be making minimum wage, doing dishes somewhere, and never give Jesus a thought, and you'd be worldly. It's not about what you do or who you are, but it's who you're living for. God's command that we love not the world shows that worldliness is really the matter of where our heart is at. What we do possess reveal only symptoms of worldliness, but it's why we do with what we have and what we possess and certain things. I remember this wealthy man once told me that everything I own, I own with an open hand because it's really God's. And I'm just the caretaker of those things. And he lived that way. Nor is a person worldly because they enjoy good things of this world. 1 Timothy 6:17 says this. It says, richly supply us with all things to enjoy. God says, richly supply us with all things to enjoy. Worldliness enters into the picture when the things of this life become our consuming passion and we elbow out Jesus out of our thoughts and out of our hearts. Verse 16, John mentions 3 ingredients that make up all that is in the world, and each one is an attitude of our heart rather than an activity of our lives. And so let's look at these 3 ingredients. The first ingredient of worldliness is that a desire to do something God has not allowed. A desire to do something that God has not allowed. And that's the lust of the flesh. The lust of the flesh, another name for that lust of the flesh could be our old sinful nature. Even as Christians, we continue to possess it. It naturally rebels against God. The lust is a desire that just goes too far with things. I remember in the Baptist church again when I first became a Christian, when we were having guy talks with all the guys, and they said, yeah, guys, pretty much when you look at a girl, the first look isn't sin, it's just temptation. The second look is sin. And so I said, okay, well, then we just don't take our eyes off of her. Just look at her. No, that's not what he meant, but... But the flesh in our lives is a desire to do something God has forbidden. Take sexual lust. Sex is good in marriage. But if we want to use it outside of marriage, then we trespass over God's boundaries in which He's given to us, and we commit lust. And it's not only lust of the flesh to sexual sin, but it's also desires that just go too far. It craves something that God has forbidden us to do or doesn't want us to do. It even falls into things of our life that maybe have been taken away from us, and we really wanted to do it, but it got taken away. A few years ago, a 19-year-old young man entered into a fitness club in El Cajon, California, and he shot 4 people to death. Then he killed himself, and the police went and they questioned all his friends for a motive, and they replied he was deeply depressed because he had just had surgery and couldn't work out at the club anymore. Ryan, you better be careful. Yeah, because something was taken away that he lived for, and it was all about working out in the gym, and when that taken away, he didn't want anybody else to have those same benefits. Jealousy took over his life. Envy took over. And the bitterness led this teenager to make sure that if he could enjoy his pleasure, then no one else could either. He made an idol over that activity. I can't tell you, more than one time I've heard counseling guys and their marriages falling apart. I've heard guys say to me, you see it on television and you hear it, but I've had guys tell me that if she isn't going to live with me, no one else is going to live with her either. I'll take her life and then take my own life. What a control. What happened to this person that their mind so much took over that all of a sudden in their anger and being in their depressed sort of mind that they let bitterness take over their lives and they commit the lust of the flesh. And all of a sudden sometimes they have no reasoning. Flesh can also even appear spiritually. A pastor can be dissatisfied with their small church or within their church that they serve. And so he wants to go bigger and better and gain recognition and status. And so all of a sudden he's jumping to church, climbing the ladder of success for the purpose of success and not really hearing from God. It can hit all of us at different times. When we try to reach some kind of status or important part of our lives and not really listening. It's not about the advancement, but it's the purpose and the reason why you are advancing. The lust of the flesh says, I want to pursue my own desires rather than God's. Instead of the opposite, it's just surrendering our will to God and hearing what He is saying to us. What is He whispering in our heart? Hearing His voice. God's voice in our lives, sometimes it's screaming at us and we just don't want to pay attention, but other times it's like a candle watt power. And if I held a candle out right now, you wouldn't see it with all these light bulbs in here. But you came in here at night and all the lights were out, that light would almost light up the room, wouldn't it? Well, that's how God speaks to us. We got to turn off the world. We got to turn off all the activities and stop long enough to just hear his voice in our lives. God wants that communication with us. But we're so busy with things and survival and everything else, we don't turn things off to hear his voice in our lives. How about you? You desire your own personal desires rather than really what seeking God's desires are in your life. The second ingredient is a desire to have something that God has not given. And that's the second part of this lust of the eyes. It's a selfish desire to possess what we see but we don't need. Ray Stedman, a famous author and pastor, says this about the lust of the eyes. It's a great statement. He says, the desire to have things you don't need, bought with money you don't have, to impress people you don't like. I love it, man. I remember growing up, we lived in a rundown area of, it was called Redwood City, kind of like the limits, and it was kind of like a low-income area. Now houses are $1 million there. It's all changed, but right across the way was the next town over. It was like a main street, and then they were there, was a very wealthy area. My uncle and aunt lived there, and they lived in this house that back in the 70s was couple $1 million home, and now it's like $10 million home. But my uncle was in real estate, and he tended to be a little bit lazy, and I remember my dad always complaining about him and stuff like that, and my dad would say, yeah, they parked this great car outside, but they don't have enough money to put gas in it to run it. You know, but they have this facade of, I'm in real estate and I make all this money. So it's a desire to have something that he has not given to us. It's keeping up with the Joneses. Trying to buy a new car because all of a sudden you feel you must have that because someone else bought a new car or a new house or a swimming pool in the backyard. And you feel like you just can't be content without it. Well, what started that? Well, you saw your neighbor have that, so all of a sudden you need to have that. That's the lust of the eyes. The advertising media are expert at evoking that in our own lives. And so, I don't know what happened with this. Okay, so they're just experts at making us feel that we've got to have that. You know, when a woman opens up a mail order catalog and all of a sudden she's seeing all the pretty dresses and the models that wear them, and she says, boy, if I can only buy that dress, I would look just like her. You know, it's all in the marketing, isn't it? We go into the stores, and Suzanne works in some of that redoing the shelving, and they redo the shelving so that when you first walk in, your eyes will be drawn to that. And she'll say something that was on the bottom that didn't sell, they move it to that place, and it's gone within the week. It's all in marketing, and we're the dummies that fall into that. And I'm just as bad. I get something through the office, and it says, this is a must-read for the pastor. Oh, you know, every church needs this. Oh, I got to get that. You know, you know, 10 ways that you can grow your church. Oh, I got to buy that one, you know. We all fall into that. My bookshelf is full of those books. Yeah. And look, it hasn't helped a whole lot, but no Christian library, no pastor is complete without these books. Okay, I got to get it. I got to be complete. We all fall into that. You know, in all those little advertisements they do on television, my wife says I'm a sucker for those things, you know. She goes, you don't need that, but look at what it'll do, honey, you know. And it's filling a need. Yeah, don't do it. Like, okay. I'd be in trouble without her. I'd be a hoarder or something. Greed gains access to our heart through our eyes. Greed gains access into our heart through the eyes. Pornography is a terrible example of the lust of the eyes. It takes our imaginations, and all of a sudden it brings a craving and something that we must have that we don't have in our lives, and it just pulls us into something that almost is imaginary, but we buy into that, saying that boy, that's just going to make I've got to have that. I got to look at that, and it's doing something and it creates something in us. And it's just a lie. And we'll never be satisfied with those things. It's Satan's tactic to enter our eye gate and plant our hearts in seeds of desire to possess something that God hasn't given to us. He's selling us a phoniness that's not reality, that would buy into something that just isn't reality. And so then we're not satisfied with our marriage. We're not satisfied with our mate. We're not satisfied with life. Why? It's because the world is painting this picture of what life should be like, and the reality of it, not many really achieve whatever it is out there. And it's kind of like this facade that we all buy into. I remember once my parents had I think it was a 50th or 40th anniversary, and they took all the kids and our families up to a place, I can't even remember what was that place called? Like Reno, Nevada, and we walked in there, and I mean, the food they feed you is, my goodness, it was incredible. They feed you like crazy. But you go in there, and it's all this lights and glitter and bing, 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 and you go in there and you're just stimulated, it's like, whoa, But all of a sudden you sit back and you say, what a plastic fake this is. This isn't real. But it sucks you into this thing that you want to get in there and get involved with it and put your money in the machine, and it's all a facade. It's all to rob you of your money. But we fall into the lust because our eye gate is a plant that Satan wants to seed things in our heart that is not God's desire for our lives. Deception. So easily we fall into it, the lust of the eyes. When we see only one side of the issue, we see the thrill, but not the after effects. When Satan tempted Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, the woman saw the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to her eyes. Here's the key, and catch this. Eve saw the pleasure side, but not the consequence side. She didn't see that her sin would curse women with the pain of childbirth. She didn't see that it would bring death to the world. She didn't see that the human race would inherit a sinful nature from her. She didn't see that God's only Son would have to die on the cross for the sins of the world. She saw a pleasure, but she didn't see the consequence. In Samuel, we see King David once saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful in appearance, and David envisioned the fulfillment of a sexual fantasy, so he called the woman and he slept with her. He didn't see that the woman would get pregnant. He didn't see that he would kill her husband to cover up his own sin. He didn't see that God would take his only baby in death a week after the birth. What we enter in sin and we begin sin with, and the desire that does, we never see the consequences of that sin. I have another story about the Baptist church, one of my beginnings as a Christian. I'm not proud of this story. I'm kind of embarrassed, and I don't think I've ever shared this, but our church was just on fire for God. In the youth group, we went to Hawaii, we went on stage, we did a musical, Tomorrow May Never Come. It was big music. There was sometimes up to 200 youth coming to it. And then the pastor left, the youth pastor left, and all of a sudden, by the time I was a senior, there was almost like no one left. There was more kids in the parking lot that was in church. And it was like, it just disintegrated. And it seemed like revelation took place of the church where, the hearts in John, where it says, many hearts will grow cold in the end days. And it was just like that. And I was just a young Christian, and I was at that point because my parents were Catholic, and I kind of had enough of going to the Catholic church and going to the Baptist. I was kind of doing both things, and I ended up living at this deacon's home at the Baptist church. Well, again, things weren't going so good, and I would probably say that I was backsliding some, but I didn't really realize it. And we all went to the drive-in movie. I mean, a car full of guys with the deacon. And all of a sudden, he pulls out a bottle of wine. And so, the choice was for me, do I drink or not drink? Well, I gave in to the peer pressure, and we all drank. And here was my thought. I'll just drink enough to feel it, then I'll stop. Well, I didn't know wine that you don't feel it for really, so I just guzzled down that stuff. And when I started feeling it, I stopped, but I kept feeling it. By the second movie at the drive-in, I was seeing old Ralph. Ralph! I don't know what the movie was because I just saw Ralph the whole rest of the movie. And I was feeling so bad and so guilty and so sick. You know, what you went into it was not what I ended up with. You know, and it's just then, you know, just feeling so guilty over the whole thing. But, you know, we all fall into things, don't we? And we make bad decisions, and then we have to have the consequences of those decisions, you know? And, you know, there's consequences for what we do. When Satan tempted Jesus, he showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. It's in Luke 4:5. And I think the devil cut off the sight because it's in a moment of time. And I believe that he didn't want Jesus to see the whole picture. He wanted Jesus just to see the present glamour, the future, and not the judgment, but all the glamour and all the glitz, but not the future judgment that was going to be for Satan. The opposite of lust of the eyes, as we see, and I'm going to shoot through some scriptures, is Hebrews 11:1. It says the opposite of the lust of faith, of the eyes of faith, is the conviction of things not seen. 2 Corinthians 4:18 says, people of faith look not at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. The things which are seen are temporal, but the things that are not seen are eternal. You see, all of a sudden, when we take our eyes off the world and we put it on Jesus and we put our focus on Jesus, then all of a sudden we're living our life that we're looking at eternal perspective, not just what is temporal right now. And that's the hardest thing to do in our lives, is to not look at the temporal, but look at the eternal. Don't look at what's happening at this moment, but look at what the long-term plan is that God has in our lives. The eternal plan. Sometimes Christians, we just need to get a clue and wake up a lot of times. A lot of times the decisions we make, we just fall into all kinds of issues and problems, and then we try to blame it back on God. Well, why me, God? And I'd say, well, why not you, you idiot? I don't say that, but I feel like saying it. 2 Corinthians 5:7 says this, God wants us to be spiritual, not worldly, to walk by faith, not by sight. In Hebrews 11:6, without faith is it impossible to please God. The third ingredient this morning I want us to look at is that it's a desire to be something God has not willed. It continues on with saying the ingredient in worldliness is the boastfulness or boastful pride of life. It's a desire to have others think more highly of you. It's considered to be a big shot, a mover, a shaker. It's a craving for self-importance. People who are guilty of boastful pride of life go out of their way to make sure that others can identify them with maybe a prestigious company or people who they know. When you go and they talk to them, all of a sudden they bring in, well, I know this person and that person. All of a sudden, why? It's because they're hiding themselves of how great they are. In fact, in the morning when they look in the mirror, they probably sing, how great I am, how great I am. I remember going to the store, and there was this Harley, and this guy pulled up to the Harley, and this biker guy, and he gets it, and this Harley was just awesome. He walks out in the store, and everyone gawked around. He couldn't wait to get back out on the store and go back to his bike because everyone was gawking at the bike. See, his identity was about the Harley. And when he was away from the Harley, all of a sudden he didn't have any importance. How about you? What are the things that you take pride in, and you want to associate yourself with that because that makes you feel really important? Boastful pride can even apply to spiritual things. Yeah. It's like people who are praying and all of a sudden they got to have all these elegant prayers in front of people and very flowery, and they use the King James Version to make themselves be spiritual. But then during the week they don't pray at all. It's doing any good things to exalt yourself in the eyes of others. That really is a boastful pride of life too. How do we guard against the boastful pride of life? We got to remember that our abilities, our status, our possessions are all gifts from God. 1 Corinthians 4:7 says this in the Living Bible. It's great in the Living Bible. It says, "What are you so puffed up about? What do you have that God hasn't given you anyway? You know, who do you really think you are? You think you're all that in a bag of chips, as they say in Australia? No, you're not all that. It's because of God. Maybe God has given you favor, and God has given you abilities, and it's us being able to say, Lord, whatever I have, talent, abilities, whatever I have, God, is just available for you, and I'm just a steward of that. It's not about me." In the men's Bible study, we've been studying a book, and it's in the title of it, it's all about family. Forget about me, I love you, family. Forget about me, I love you. And it's learning to be a man that says, first, forget about me, because I'm going to love my family, my wife, my kids, and others first. All we have from God, we need to realize that it's a gift, and it's a privilege. The opposite of boastful pride of life is a desire that we magnify Christ in our lives and everything we do. And worldly people are so obsessed with maintaining their reputation in the eyes of others, but spiritual people are concerned with only that God will get the glory, and that they're concerned about lifting the glory of God in other people's lives. And it's not even about how wonderful they are, but it's about how many other people they can bring alongside them and lift them up to a different level spiritually, and even be able to pass them up and be able to see them do greater things than that they've been able to accomplish. Well, why should we avoid worldliness? God does more than just command us not to love the world, but he provides us, I think, 3 things we can look at today to back up why we should avoid worldliness. And the first is that the love of the world rules out the love for God. In verse 15, he warns us that if anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. You see, there's 2 loves. Can we have the love of the world and the love of the Father still at the same time? And I believe here it's kind of like saying, can you have light and darkness in the same space at the same time? In James 4:4, it says, "Do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility towards God?" So whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Now, we can take it out of context. I'm trying to keep it within the framework of what I'm talking about this morning. But there's a principle. In Matthew 6:24, it says, "No one can serve 2 masters. We either serve God or we serve the world." You know, who are you serving in your life? When you work and you're at a place of work, are you working to please the boss or to get a raise or to get success? Or do you go to that place and say, man, I'm going to go into this workplace, and God, I want to glorify you in everything I do because I'm working for you. It's not about a paycheck that's coming out. It's not about who I can oppress. It's about I'm going to glorify you, Father, today, so that when people look at me, they can glorify you. And it doesn't matter if you're the, chief executive of a company or if you're a bottle washer. You can glorify God, and other people can see God in you if you're sweeping the floors. In fact, one of my first jobs, I worked in a glass shop, and I came after school, and I swept up glass at the glass shop and in the bins and had to take it out, and we'd all get cut up. But I glorified God every day, and by the end I worked there. By the time I graduated from high school, I became a shower door installer, and I got all these. I was never after, and all of a sudden other guys were all jealous at me because I got to be an installer and they were still cutting glass and doing all that. And all it was, well, I just wanted to glorify God even when I was sweeping floors in high school. See, it wasn't about a position. It was about glorifying the Father. And somehow when the world sees Christians like that, they say there's something in that person that's different. And all of a sudden, I believe, we start getting the favor of God because something different is in us. The second way we can avoid worldliness is the values of the world do not come from God. In verse 16, it says, "For all that is in the world is not from the Father, but it's from the world." In a sense, everything that's in the world is from the Father. And here's a little bit confusing because he created all the trees. He creates the animals, the lakes, the mountains. But the passage is not speaking about the physical world again, but we're looking at the spiritualness of worldliness. It's not the things around us that make us worldly, but it's what's inside our hearts that make us worldly. When we believe the world's ideals and we seek acceptance and adopt their standards, and we cherish their friendships and their approval, we have the condition that does not come from God. Because then all of a sudden, our values become different than the values that God wants us to be. The third reason to avoid worldliness is that the world is passing away. In verse 17, John concluded this section with a reminder that we do so desperately to hear, and the world is passing away. The world is like this parade, and it's a pageantry, and it looks so impressive, but it doesn't last. The Rose Parade in California, they put all this energy and time and beautiful money, incredible amount of money goes into these floats. But all of it dies, doesn't it, after the big day, after the parade. It's kind of like a Thanksgiving dinner when you put all your time and all that effort and planning and all that stuff, and the family comes and it's gone in 10 minutes. It's like, what happened to that? It's gone, Well, it's over. But that's what this world is like. Finding our greatest fulfillment, if we're just looking at what the world can fulfill, then we fall into worldliness. And the world says to us, find your greatest fulfillment in your work. But those who sell their souls to a career eventually lose it in retirement or death. The world says that pleasure is like what life is all about. But the more we indulge in the pleasure, the less it really satisfies. In John, verse 17, it says that not only the world, but also its lust are passing away. Our ability to enjoy the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the boastful pride of life will diminish in time also. Ask any drug addict. The more they use, the more they crave, and the less they enjoy it. In contrast to the world that is passing away, we expect John to say, but God abides forever. But instead he wrote this in verse 17, but the one who does the will of God abides forever. Doing the will of God, doing God's will, breaking it down to the most simplest form, is just loving him. And people who love the Lord prove that they have been changed by him on the inside and that they belong to him. And now as Christians, they have a privilege of living forever with him. Martin Luther said this once. He says, I've held many things in my hand and I've lost them all. But the things I've placed in God's hands, I still possess. Only what belongs to the Lord will last forever, won't it? A judgment time, it says that, everything we've done will come under fire. And the things that we've done for the Lord is what won't be burned in that fire. In 1 John 5:19, it says, because the whole world lies in the power of the evil one, it will all pass away. So we can know the world But if our appetites and our satisfaction comes by this world standard, then our taste for spiritual things will become dim. And the one song we sing and the things of this world will become strangely dim. When? When we find our fullness and our satisfaction in the things of God. Where do you find your satisfaction at? Where do you struggle at? Maybe as I preached this morning, the Holy Spirit was talking to you in areas of your life. Only the Holy Spirit is revealing them. I don't know what they are. The person sitting next to you may not know what they are. But 1 John 1:9 says, if we confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. I had to learn that verse when I was a young Christian, and it's one of my life verses because I have to go back to it time and time again. Father, I just want to breathe out and ask you to forgive me for things I've done and what I've done and decisions and even thoughts I've had. I just get it all out. I breathe it all out, and then I breathe back in His love, His grace, His forgiveness. Isn't it wonderful as Christians we can do that? Let's keep in mind that the issue of worldliness is love. Interesting to see that in verse 15 it says, and I'm coming to an end here, it says, do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Would you stand with me and bow your heads? And just for a moment, if you would just think of some thoughts here. Just with your heads bowed. And remember the first time your heart was broken after you fell in love with that boyfriend or that girlfriend? How did you get over that time? Probably by not trying to forget that other person or busying yourself to keep yourself busy in other matters. Sometimes the only way you got over a broken relationship and a broken heart was by falling in love with someone else at a certain point. And then all of a sudden you could be healed of that hurt that seemed like nothing else could do. Well, the only cure for loving the world, the only cure for that is by falling in love with Christ and exchanging that love that you had for the world for the love that you have for Christ. Give up that old flame called the world and get a new flame in your heart that's God. The grievance that the Lord had with the church in Ephesians was in Revelation 2:4, where it says, you have left your first love. Maybe some of you this morning have left your first love. And when I say your first love, when you loved Christ and you came to Christ, everything else didn't matter. But maybe in the matter of time, you begin to backslide and other things have taken that place of that first love. Would you just commit to the Lord this morning right now and renew your love for Christ? And again, in your own heart, confessing it to the Lord right now is 1 John 1:9. Confess it to Him and say, Lord, I want to reestablish my love with you, and I'm going to forsake the world. And whatever those things are that's been drawing you out that I preached on this morning, maybe you just need to recommit that this morning to Him because you've left that first love. Nothing creates a love for the Lord as much as really the sight of seeing Him dying on the cross for you. For you personally, Christ went on that cross to give His life as a ransom for you, to purchase you so that you may, in a sense, be adopted as a child of God. We need to get back to Calvary. We need to love Christ with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our strength. And as we focus on Christ, then the world will lose its attractiveness. Hi, I'm Pastor John McConnell, and I'd like to welcome you today for watching our program. It's just amazing the technology we have today that we're able to live stream all around the world. And we'd like to give you an opportunity, if you'd like to give towards this ministry, you can go online
and be able to follow the directions that are on there and be able to give to the ministry that you've been watching. So God bless you. We thank you for being part of Southside Alliance Church today.